Eric, first time I met you. So it was actually after you did a fireside somewhere. And I remember walking away just completely mind blown. Like my brain was scrambled. You dropped so much knowledge in such a short amount of time. So high bar, but I think we can meet it. It's just what you do. Since the metaphor that means so much to us is stories, I wonder if we can kind of like break down the story like of this moment with AI in healthcare. Maybe like at a high level, how we got here as an industry, you know, where healthcare is, but also what AI means to this moment too.
Yeah, can everybody hear me okay? Does it come through? Okay, great. So first off, super honored to be here. I love this guy. I just have huge admiration for what you're building. And even bigger than that, I just really appreciate the authenticity with which you do it. And you sort of emanate authenticity, and it really resonates. And you also dress fucking cool. Like I was texting with Shiv yesterday, I was like, I gotta raise my sartorial game. And I texted him, I'm like, cause dude, you're like wabi-sabi science fiction. And I was in love with that phrasing, and I got crickets. Like nothing. Did not even like a smiley face emoji. So anyway, it's all good. Okay, so let me give you, maybe just, I'm gonna start super non-ambitiously at the level of the cosmos. Because I think this is I think AI is the single most consequential civilization-altering technology in the history of humanity. And if you actually try to compress, and I love your sort of narrative, sort of architecture, like what is the storytelling? Like, let's compress 4,500 years of human history into like 60 seconds, right? Because if you look retrospectively over civilization, there are 10 to 20 civilization-altering technologies, right? That shaped society, that shaped economies, that shaped our very sort of like, you know, sort of identification as a species. And we know what these are. 4,500 years ago was the advent of like, you know, writing and agriculture and animal husbandry and the wheel and the printing press and penicillin and the transistor and the internet, and then November 22nd, November 30th, 2022, and that's ChatGPT. And these are general purpose technologies, GPT, so eponymous, generative pre-trained transformer, general purpose technology. And what they did was, for a long time, they sort of augmented human and animal musculature. They enabled us to effectuate things in the world. And then post-World War II, we started to see technologies that amplified low-level human cognition, like the calculator, right? Like the PC. Suddenly, you've got a technology that I characterize as a multiplication of intelligence. I actually think this is a speciation event. And I think we are instantiating a synthetic or silicon intelligence that in many quantifiable and measurable ways already supersedes our biological intelligence. And the way I think about this is like, you know, GPT-2 was the cognitive equivalent of a preschooler, GPT-3, cognitive equivalent of a high schooler, GPT-4, college student, GPT-5, some polymathic, PhD, semi-omniscient creature that can't spell strawberry, right? It's a jagged frontier of technology, jagged frontier of intelligence. But in some very real ways, it is challenging our supremacy as a species, right? We're Homo sapiens, we are wise humans. We have defined our hierarchy among species according to intelligence. We've stratified human recognition according to intelligence. And suddenly, we're no longer the unquestioned, we no longer have unquestioned primacy. So I kind of start from the premise, most powerful technology in history, and then I think about healthcare. And I approach healthcare with like devotion and reverence. What clinicians do is like a magnificence. And so I start with a deep humility and a deep gratitude. And then I try to look at US healthcare with a critical eye. And let me give you my mental model on US healthcare. I think about US healthcare, $4.9 trillion, you know, almost a fifth of US GDP. But sort of paradoxically, I think about it as controlled by 150 people. US healthcare is the most oligopolistic, hyper-concentrated, hyper-regulated, incrementalist industry in the US economy. And those 150 people are a noble group. I kind of think about them as the Illuminati, right?
Yeah, a few of them are here, I think.
A few of them are here, right? So you've got the 84 men and 16 women that lead the largest health systems in the country. Top 100 health systems represent $936 billion out of $1.6 trillion. You've got the 7 publicly traded managed care company CEOs that on a good day had $1 trillion market capitalization. Now it's about $600 billion. You've got 33 Blue Cross Blue Shield CEOs that collectively underwrite 119 million Americans, 1 out of every 3. And then you have 10 biopharma CEOs that collectively have about $5 trillion in market cap. Maybe I'll put in Judy Faulkner into that mix, but it's a big group, right? 150 people. But it's sort of like microscopic when you think about the leverage that they have in the industry. I believe that all past technologies for healthcare had to be refracted through the 150. But suddenly you've got the most powerful technology in history hitting the most immobilized, impenetrable sector in the US economy. And there's 2 totally orthogonal cultures. Silicon Valley has tried techno-solutionism and tried to innovate and be insurgents to press against the incumbency. But there is not a single example of an insurgent in healthcare that has graduated to the ranks of incumbent. Maybe Epic, and I'm betting on Abridge, but it's a vanishingly small group. There were 13,000 digital health companies that got spawned during the pandemic in diagnostic, therapeutic, clinical, non-clinical workflow, care augmentation, with probably about a 95% extinction rate. Now you've got a new generation of technology. So most powerful technology hitting the most impenetrable industry. I almost think about it as Mark Zuckerberg versus Hippocrates. Move fast and break things, first do no harm. Totally orthogonal cultures. So the last thing I'll say, and I'll pause for oxygen, is US healthcare has the greatest susceptibility to revolution from this technology more than any other industry. Why? 4 reasons. First, the labor addiction. When I think about Gen AI, I'm going to ask you to abstract away from the 2 Nobel Prizes that were awarded to Gen AI on December 10th of last year in physics and chemistry, right? Jeffrey Hinton and John Jumper and Demis Hassabis. I'm going to ask you to abstract away from the text to photorealistic image, from text to cinematic quality video, all the generative things that is so hypnotizing. Set those aside. What is Gen AI? Gen AI, in its first chapter, is about brute force productivity augmentation and the systematic substitution of technology for labor. US healthcare has the greatest labor addiction in the US economy. 23.8 million Americans are employed in US healthcare. 1 out of every 8 workers is in healthcare. US healthcare is the only industrial vertical that has seen negative productivity growth over the past generation. From 1970 to today, the number of doctors in the country increased 150%. From 1970 to today, the number of healthcare administrators increased 4,300%.
Crazy.
First reason US healthcare has the greatest susceptibility to disruption, labor dependency. Second reason is the data superabundance. There are 187 zettabytes of data in the world. From the dawn of civilization to the year 2010, there were 400 exabytes of data created, right? Today, we are creating 400 exabytes of data every single 24-hour period. Every single 24-hour period. 1/3 of the world's data is in healthcare. 90% of it is unstructured. It is increasing 36% per year. And prior to this technology, prior to NLP, prior to vector enablement, prior to deduping, you didn't have an intelligence that could comprehend this data. And suddenly, you can take anarchy and see patterns. And we'll talk about where the intelligence is going. The third reason that US healthcare has the greatest susceptibility to disruption is because of its past impenetrability to every tech phase shift that has come out of Silicon Valley. Internet, mobile, social, cloud, big data and analytics, enterprise SaaS, blockchain. Healthcare has been a reluctant adopter, if not obstructionist. So there's massive accumulated tech debt. Technology in every other instantiation is deflationary.
Exactly.
But in healthcare, it's inflationary. And I'll give you one statistic in this. So if you look at the year 2000 versus 2025, one inflation-adjusted real dollar of purchasing power. That same dollar in 2025 that bought a unit of healthcare in 2000 would buy 83 cents of that unit. Now look at effective compute, defined as flops, right? $1 in 2025 inflation adjusted would buy 137,000 times that same unit 25 years earlier. And so when you get this level of tech deficit and lack of productivity, now you got a technology that is massively augmentative of productivity, but is going to be really substitutive for human labor. And so the last reason is this high dimensional space in biology. We do not understand biology, right? Longevity's actually been deteriorating over the last few years. A lot of that is because of the pandemic. But the fact is we are plateauing. And Dario, who I love, and I know you do too, and I think you're going to hear from Daniela later. I don't know if she's here yet, but she's amazing. You know, Dario talks about this like compressed 21st century, where we're going to have a century of biomedical and scientific advances compressed into a 5 and 10 year period. He talks about the returns to intelligence. And I think biology is going to be the area that we're going to have the greatest return. I think you got the head of In Silico later, and then Greg from BMS, I think, right? Who I really admire both of them. We're going to have this renaissance of synthetic and computational biology. So I'll land the plan by saying, most powerful technology in history, most impenetrable industry in the US economy, go.
Okay. Somehow I drank more water than you did. So Dario was just on 60 Minutes, and he talks about doubling the human, lifespan.
Yeah.
What'd you think?
I think he's totally right. So I have...
okay, unpack that for this audience.
Yeah. So Dario and I have real reverence for him as one of the truth tellers, and I spent the afternoon with him on Monday talking a little bit about how we're going to have to totally reconceptualize like science and research and discovery. I mean, we're almost going from discovery to design. We're going from science to engineering. Now, his hypothesis, and he didn't articulate this in the 13 minutes he got on 60 Minutes, but that was just time compression. But he talks about this notion of a virtual biologist, right? So it's not that we're just going to simplify the data parsing, those 60 zettabytes of healthcare data that are suddenly answerable now to an intelligence, where we can do pattern recognition and causation and correlation and eventually invent and hypothesize new molecules. He's saying we ought to conceptualize it as all great biomedical and scientific advances have come sort of metronomically, like once a year, once every 18 months. And you can look over history. I mean, big seminal moments like X-ray crystallography or mRNA or mapping the human genome or CAR-T or immunotherapy or CRISPR or advances in microscopy. They kind of happen metronomically every 12 to 18 months. But and they really come through human ingenuity, right? But if you look at like mRNA, we knew about mRNA. There was a Nature magazine in 1961, right? And then it took 60 years to have it like come to maturity. CRISPR, we knew about since the 80s, right? And so his postulation is that if you actually instantiate a virtual biologist, and you can do it at the marginal cost of compute, right? You can instantiate as many of these individuated researchers as you like. If we are discovering things every 12 to 18 months, and you can instantiate as he calls it, a country of geniuses in a data center that apply their individuated and collective minds to accelerate mRNA, to accelerate CRISPR, to accelerate advances in some of the real intractable diseases. I mean, we've managed to eradicate a lot of the infectious diseases, but we really haven't touched any of the high complexity, like neurodegenerative diseases and oncology as an example. And so his hypothesis is, look, if you can accelerate that, then in the next 2 decades, we can get 10 to 20 years longevity expansion. And then the outer perimeter, the outer frontier of our biology is theoretically up to 150 years. So it's not implausible, right? And so, the reason I like that articulation is because it talks about what's right, what could go right. Now, I think about technology as intrinsically neutral, right? I mean, with the invention of the ship came the invention of the shipwreck. If you can design a molecule to cure cancer, you can design a bioweaponized pathogen of great lethality and transmissibility, right? Technology is neutral. And it follows that if this is indeed the most powerful technology in the history of the world, the manifestations of that can be like civilization savings or civilization destroying. And so I do subscribe to the idea that we're going to see a renaissance in synthetic and computational biology. And that I think we're going to be designing biomolecules and really reconceptualizing. It takes 10 years from bench to preclinical to clinical to FDA to commercialization, 10 years and $2.6 billion with a 90% attrition rate for a molecule to make its way to the body, right? I believe, and I imagine the folks from In Silico and Greg later will talk about doing that in 1/10 the time at 1/3 the cost. Now, I do think we still need algorithmic and architectural advances in the tech. I'm not sure that even multimodality and LLMs are going to be the solution towards superintelligence. But it does, LLMs are autoregressive and they predict the next token, right? Well, you can do that for strands of DNA and you do that for strands of dictionary words, right? And I think we're going to start to see a real manifestation of that. I'm a little agnostic on time frame. I'm not suggesting it's going to be the next 6 months, but I do have optimism that we're going to see a real Cambrian explosion and go from science to engineering. And I'll go a little further. This is more of a philosophical point in keeping with, I think, the theme of last night and today. I do think humanity is going to have a really fascinating renegotiation with itself. And if you think about the most advanced cognitive technology of the last 400 years, post-Enlightenment, is the scientific method. Scientific method is looking at an incomprehensible universe and trying to hypothesize something and gather data and look for falsifiability and have others look at it and verify and replicate. When Francis Bacon articulated that in the 17th century, he was responding to two constraints. One, cognitive limitation, and two, data scarcity. Well, we've spent a few minutes talking about both of those are obsolete. So we're going to go from like iterative hypothesis and falsifiability to simulations of trillions of scenarios. We're going to go to computational sort of iteration. I almost think about it as scientific method giving way to generative epistemology. It's a new way for us to invent. What is the role of the human in that? Is it verification? Is it stewardship? Is it ethics? Is it the Hippocratic Oath? I think this, one of the things I love about you is that you actually you articulate the question beneath the question. And I do think, I'm deeply optimistic about what's going to happen. I think we're going to enter a post-scarcity abundant world. I think it's going to create unprecedented wealth, unprecedented knowledge, unprecedented advances in medicine. And it's also, as a corollary, going to create unprecedented inequalities of economics, of social influence, of political power. Freedom and equality are contradictory. You want more of one, you get less of the other. You have full freedom, you're going to have massive inequality because you have a dispersion of talent, dispersion of outcome. You want to mandate equality, you're going to have to constrain freedom. And suddenly you've got a technology that's going to magnify everything. And it's going to happen in healthcare. And the 150 people, some of whom are in this room, have an enormous responsibility. And it is a depreciating by the day power.
Let's talk about that. Maybe we'll come back to the Paul Virilio quote later, because I think that there's more to unpack there. So a couple of weeks ago, I'm on X, and I'm scrolling through, and I see this Anthropic researcher referring to models as creatures. That's when I knew we were cooked.
Yeah.
And we were backstage we were touching upon like payers, providers, just sort of like starting to think about what's going to happen over these coming years. And we were reflecting on just like the state of the industry. The barriers to entry in healthcare have historically been as high as the barriers to exit. That's why there's just so many companies in between that can actually not innovate, and they're fine.
Yeah.
Are those barriers to entry actually coming down? How does AI actually, does it need help to get in those doors of the payer or the provider? And maybe if we can unpack systematically payers first, and then what you see coming for providers.
It's so interesting, Shiv. Like what you just said, we do not understand the neurology of these creatures. And we have grand scientific, pretentious phrases for this. We call it mechanistic interpretability. Basically, we don't understand what the fuck's going on in their brain. We do not understand. And by the way, if you look over all of biological and evolutionary history, there's not a single example of a less intelligent creature controlling a more intelligent creature, right? With the maybe exception of a mother and baby, as Jeffrey Hinton says, and that took 4 billion years of evolution to program that in, right? The mother, and I'll say as a father of 3, the father hearing a baby's cry is intolerable, right? Took a lot of programming to get there. Mm-hmm. So, if we don't understand them, we better proceed with a lot of humility. And we're not. We're proceeding with total hubris, right? This is the biggest industrial mobilization in the history of the world. We're going to spend $4 trillion on infrastructure in the next 5 years, right? Like, it's like, yeah. But you're asking a really interesting question, and I think about it as incumbents versus insurgents.
Okay.
In every other industry, hospitality, services, banking, industrials, manufacturing, insurgents have ascended to the rank of incumbent. It's Darwinian, right? It's like natural law, like the new replaces the old. Mm-hmm. If you look at the Mag 7, and it's really the Mag 3 now, they all originated in the ashes of the dot-com burst, right? But it wasn't, the cab companies that innovated. It was Uber and Lyft. It wasn't Lockheed Martin and Boeing. It was SpaceX. It wasn't GM and Chrysler or whatever. It was Tesla. In every other industry, the pirates become the Navy, except in healthcare. And, why is that? Because of the regulatory capture. Mm-hmm. And some of that is really animated by a beautiful sentiment, like first do no harm. But a lot of it disguises a lot of self-interest and regulatory enclosure and weaponization of narrative, right? Well, if we go too fast, people die. Mm-hmm. And that's true, but it also has created 17.9% of our US GDP, 4.9 trillion. And I did a talk with Tom Mihaljevic last week from the Cleveland Clinic, who I love, but he got really angry with me on stage. He's like, I'm just sick of people like attacking healthcare.
That's what he said.
Yeah. And he's like, and I love Tom. He's like a force for good. But he's like, look, I'm from Croatia. I wouldn't want to get my healthcare anywhere else in the world. And I was like, Tom, I agree. US healthcare is amazing if you're rich, urban, and white. And if you're not, if you're in a marginalized community or in a rural setting, like it is about as unequal as it comes. And I was at the CEO of Johns Hopkins in Baltimore, and he pointed outside the room, and he did the demarcation of one block. And he's like, there is a 20-year lifespan difference between that side of the block and this side of the block, right? So I have a lot of cognitive dissonance, right? I revere what we do and what they do, especially clinicians. But the regulatory enclosure has stopped the permeability of small, dynamic, brilliant, iconoclastic founders that want to change the narrative. Now, I do think that is going to absolutely change, right? Because you can't have the most powerful technology in the world that isn't going to find a breach in the fortress. But we talked about the 150, and I think that there is diminishing co-authorship. And the 150, and they're all your partners, right? I think have a very small period of co-creative possibility, where they have some degree of self-determination, some agency, some instrumentality to shape this technology and make it human-centric. The alternative, there are two very dire consequences. One, if we don't do this, the solutions are going to come north of here from Silicon Valley, and it's going to be techno-solutionistic, right? I was reading something from Pope Francis this morning, and he called it the technocratic paradigm, where we just think technology is going to fix everything, right? Which is kind of dehumanizing and disempowering. Mm-hmm. So in the first chapter, this technology has done creative agglomeration, not creative destruction. The benefit has accrued
in healthcare,
to the incumbents. And I actually think across industry.
Yeah.
Across industry. But predominantly in healthcare. Big tech, absolutely, right? I mean, you know, you've now got a $5 trillion company, well, a $4.7 trillion company, right? And you're gonna have a first $10 trillion company. You know, Sam has gone from 0 to 500 billion in like a nanosecond, right? That'll be the second most valuable company in the world within 3 years, OpenAI.
Yeah, but the difference is like there's a counter hegemony in other industries who then get absorbed by the hegemonic bloc. There's no absorption in healthcare.
Yes.
The counter hegemony just dies at some point in time.
Yes, it does. Although I think what we're seeing with this new generation, and you are at the vanguard of this, of agentic and AI native founders, you're a rarity because in the previous generation of founders, those 13,000 startups, they were predominantly founded by domain experts who then bolted on the technology. This generation of founders are technologists that are importing the domain expertise. Why? Because the technology is becoming so esoteric. It's so incomprehensible unless you are an expert. And if you're an expert, Zuck's gonna give you a $100 million or $1 billion contract, right? So you're a rarity because you're a clinician and you conceptualize this and you have driven the technology forward at the frontier, right? So for a hospital, and I'll get to payer because you pointed me there.
Yeah.
Prior to this moment, it would take 23 months once a health system signed a contract with a digital health company to actually deploy that contract. And 23 months is not just one, but multiple lifetimes, right? Totally. I think those barriers are starting to weaken. Why? Because of good old-fashioned prisoner's dilemma.
Totally.
There are a couple of incumbents that are seeing the weaponization of the tech. And it's predominantly going to come through labor substitution in its first chapter. And you know, you asked me to talk about payers, but I'll talk about health systems first, because I think that's the greater surface area exposure to labor disruption. There's 7.2 million Americans employed by health systems. Average operating margin is still sub 1%, right? And health systems sort of ritualistically trade 1 or 2 points of market share. I mean, the markets are all pluralistic, right? There's usually 3 or 4 systems. Very rarely do you have one monopolist. You have an oligopoly. And I think when a few health systems start to deploy the technology, even the current nascent layer, application verticalized layer, ambient listening, summarization, documentation, coding, you are going to see augmentation of labor, and then eventually, and very quickly, you're going to see labor substitution. And the question, and I've done a lot of the board retreats with these health systems lately, and I've been telling them, moratorium on all new hires, close out all open recs, the burden of proof on anybody who wants to hire has to demonstrate conclusively why AI is not going to be able to do this in 12 months. And I've been telling them that attrition is your friend. The average health system attrits 20.9% of its workforce every year. 97% of that attrition is voluntary. Healthcare is oblivious of what is about to happen. There was a poll, a Harris poll that came out 2 months ago that said that 65% of health workers are planning on leaving their job in the next year. We are going from job hopping to job hugging. Right now, the data came out, September was unexpected, 122,000 new jobs. August was a negative 4,000. Right now, unemployment in the country is 4.4%. It is going to go up. And there is this Orwellian conspiracy of silence on this. David Sachs, who I really like, just gets like furious if anybody suggests that AI is going to substitute for labor.
Dario talks about it.
Dario has the most courage. Dario got villainized 6 months ago when he said, hey, 50% of entry-level jobs are going to vaporize, which is going to lead to 10 to 20% unemployment. And everybody attacked. And then Andy Jassy announced the contraction. Microsoft laid off another 14,000 employees. I mean, you can juxtapose what's happening in big tech versus healthcare, right? All the jobs that got added in September are services, hospitality, and healthcare, not manufacturing, consulting, and finance, right? Because you're going to see the first substitution in the prestige professions. Every post-World War II automation has amplified the power and earning capacity and societal prestige of knowledge workers. This is the first one that is going to obsolete it. Now in healthcare, with 2 million unfilled jobs, it's going to be messy. We're going to see a reduction in open postings, right? And I don't subscribe to this lump of labor fallacy that economists talk about, like if you automate something, just the jobs go away. I think healthcare is one of those fungible things where you stimulate demand, right? You know, Vinod, who I really think very highly of, talks about 80% of jobs are going to get automated, but he talks about this notion of doing 100 visits in 100 days. Some synchronously, some asynchronously, building this agentic workforce. He calls them interns because that's the nomenclature of medicine, right? And, you know, and I want to talk about one other thing because, you know, ChatGPT has 900 million weekly active users. You know the #1 use case for those? Mental health. Yes, it's therapy and companionship. Therapy and companionship. And this is really important. So I'm gonna let you in on a really subtle psychological secret. Like humans lie to other humans. Now, why? Well, to avoid embarrassment, stigmatization, judgment, and discrimination. They will lie to other humans, but they will tell the truth to ChatGPT. They anthropomorphize it, but not enough to feel embarrassed to tell it the truth, right? So think about therapy for a second. We have a total scarcity and a geographic maldistribution of psychiatrists, psychologists, therapists, coaches. We know if you've got a medical case with a behavioral comorbidity, your medical costs are 2.5 to 6.7x greater. We know that 40% of patients abandon their pharmacologic scripts every year, leading to $400 billion in waste. Suddenly, you've got, I don't have my phone with me, you've got 24/7 persistent availability, sycophantic, meaning it matches Shiv's personality or Larsen's personality. You know, underrepresented minorities and marginalized communities feel mirrored. Has 230 millisecond latency. It speaks at the speed of human conversation. We're past the uncanny valley where the simulated laugh or inhalation exhalation just feel creepy. It's actually indistinguishable. Yeah. These things are evincing theory of mind, meaning I can perceive the unvoiced question.
We have the director of Her with us later today.
Oh, do you really?
Yeah, Spike
Dude, that's, oh yeah, of course. I mean, that's amazing. I mean, science fiction predicted all this, and Spike, you should ask Spike about that, because Her is super prophetic, right? And so the reason I say all this is because, like, how do we get the 150 to partner with the insurgents, right? I think it's gonna be a competitive dynamic, because the ones that do it first are asymmetrically gonna win. I'm on the board of Oscar Health, right? So we think about what's gonna happen on the payer side. And I spend a lot of time with the big payers. There are 611,000 employees right now across US healthcare payers, right? There's 1.5 trillion in premiums collected. We're off the record, right? Even though I said cameras. I speak really candidly. Like, I don't know what the point of the payer is anymore. Not because I'm some like.
We should go another 30 minutes now. Let's just see that right now.
Well, look, we did the largest take private in healthcare last year. I think the second largest. We did the $9 billion take private of R1, which is a revenue cycle management company. I'm a huge evangelist for it. we're automating things ruthlessly. You can do things in an autocracy that you can't do in a Western, messy, liberal market democracy. And that's true of countries, companies, and CEOs. And wearing my private equity hat, we can be autocratic. We're going to do these things. We're going to lower the cost to serve, and I think in the process going to take all the oxygen out of the RCM market. But the things that we're automating, the thing that's going to get automated first is RCM. Why? Because of two very important words for everybody in this room to internalize: functional verifiability. If there is math involved, there is a correct and incorrect answer. There is functional verification. You can back propagate that into the algorithm. You can create high quality synthetic data. Anything you do behind a computer, you can automate. So here's the question. If we spend $600 billion adversarially between health systems and payers in litigating and arbitrating disagreements about payment and integrity, what the payers have done to date has largely been around creating administrative complexity and opacity.
Yeah, business models that are based on friction.
Business models that are based on friction and hierarchically rationing access to expensive modalities of care. Now, the good interpretation of that is it's, deflationary, although that's not been the case in healthcare, and it stops fraud, waste, and abuse. The bad part of that is it's obstructionist, right? So what I've been observing is that if the business model is around opacity and administrative friction, LLMs and multimodality in their basic out-of-the-box capability set kill that. I don't care if your policy manual is 100 pages or 1 billion pages. Like my LLM can take a femtosecond and parse it out instantly and make it understandable for me, right? So there's the 14% SG&A, right? 611,000 employees. I also think about the medical superintelligence. Right now, the generalized models are already superhuman. They're already superhuman from a differential diagnostic, care treatment, and care protocol point of view. And this is one of the things that I really admire about Abridge, because you are aggregating these high dimensionality data sets, structured, unstructured, and it's so helpful for your doctors, so helpful for the health system. 54% of doctors are employed by hospitals. So in a way, doctors and hospitals are kind of synonymous, right? And you debureaucratize. I mean, the typical primary doctor spends 70% of her day on administrative shit, right? Fighting with the payers, like hunting for DME, hunting for pharmacologics. Like, if you automate all of that, suddenly, instead of a 1 to 2,000 panel, I could do a 1 to 10 panel or a 1 to 20,000 panel, right?
Yeah. We have a few minutes left.
Yeah, sorry, kind of went off the rails.
No, not at all. We could keep going. Where do we want to leave this?
I guess I want to, let's talk practically. What do we do?
Yeah. I'm just reflecting upon everything that you said, and my phone is buzzing. My phone is buzzing because I'm in a WhatsApp group with family in India because my mom's sister is in the ICU. They're withdrawing care. She'll pass away the next day. Earlier this morning, I spoke to the doctors in India, and that interaction with those doctors meant so much to me. That interaction, that human-to-human interaction, means so much. We'll always need those interactions. We'll always have those interactions with clinicians. And as those barriers come down, as AI infiltrates, as clinician panels exponentially increase, it'll be really hard to scale that.
Hard to scale the empathy?
Hard to scale that, I think.
I don't know that I agree. I mean, we're entering this weird utopian, dystopian dynamic where, in a way, like that authentic soul is non-replicable, right? Like there is something irreducible about us as a species that I do believe in the immortality of the soul. Like and I do think that intelligence isn't just about ingesting, exabytes of data and seeing patterns in a mechanistic, statistical way. But I think we need to acknowledge that there is a deep humanistic reevaluation of what is possible. And in a way, we're already learning empathy from the chatbots. Because you're a brother of mine, and if you call me, and when we talk, you're like, Larsen, I'm dealing with this. Like, my immediate reaction is like, dude, I love you. Like, here's how I dealt with that.
Yeah.
That is categorically the wrong thing to say. Right? And what the chatbots do is like, tell me more about that. Like, and let me, longitudinally what we talked about a week ago or a month ago or a year ago, and like, let me, what do these things excel at? They excel at analogic thinking. They're polymathic, right? And they see connections, and then they're infinitely patient, and they're unhurried, and they simulate empathy, but so my optimism is that we can restore humanity to the practice of medicine by debureaucratizing all of that. I almost think about it as cybernetics, right? You're gonna have this medical superintelligence in your pocket that is gonna make you omniscient, right?
Yeah.
And what is our reaction to complexity? In medicine, it's been to draw smaller and smaller circles around body parts and organelles and cells, right? And as a result, we have the most expensive healthcare system in the world and the most balkanized healthcare system in the world. The oncologist doesn't know what the primary care doctor talked about, doesn't know what the pharmacologist did, doesn't know what the behavioralist did. Like, suddenly, I think you're gonna see a reunification of the specialties. You're going to see one omniscient, sort of like medical superintelligence. We're going to kill bureaucracy, which means that we can have that authentic conversation.
Cheers to that. You had me there.
No, and I think that's going to be amazing, but I don't think the right answer is to deprecate the tech and say it's soulless, it's a stochastic parrot, whatever. It has some really intrinsic properties that open up new frontiers of possibility. For 1 out of every 3 people in industrialized countries is lonely, right? And a buddy of mine who founded a company called Replica, that I think is really remarkable. I don't know if anybody have used that, but they have 40 million users, right? There was a study a few years ago that said that if you use Replica, does it displace human interaction or does it stimulate human interaction? So the displacement hypothesis or the stimulation hypothesis. Turns out, and we need a lot more research on this, it's the stimulation hypothesis. It actually empowers me to have more human interactions, right? It's almost doing it in simulation and getting skill. So where I land the plane, Shiv, is that I think we can become more human by debureaucratizing, by getting away from the enslavement of the stuff that we didn't sign up to do, but our bureaucratic, complex, adversarial system imposes on us. But I think we're gonna have to really re-evaluate what it means to be human and what does it mean to be cybernetic. Are we going to amplify our humanity with the technology? Or is it going to be dehumanizing and massively dislocating? I am deeply optimistic, but we profit nothing by telling bedside stories about what, AI is not going to replace doctors, but doctors who use AI are going to replace doctors. I think that's a bad narrative. I think that's a dangerous narrative. I think we're going to have to fundamentally reevaluate what it means to be a doctor in a post-ubiquitous, free intelligence world.
Incredible conversation. Thank you, Eric. Thank you for setting the tone for the day.
Thank you.